The all-new XL decoder socket promises to be something that brings simplicity to fitting DCC decoders to these large-scale models. We're actually going to be using the XL headers and manufacturing our own pins for these that we can solder fly leads to that then screw to the screw terminals on the Zen Buddha. Hey, so great to see you and I hope I found you well. This is Weird Yard, I'm Jenny Kirk and today we're talking budget DCC fitting. Now it's something that I always like to do as a USP for all of the reviews that I do here, which is show you how you can easily DCC fit them. But there was a model which kind of got us foxed. It was the rather tricksy Heljan O-gauge class 26, and by rights this should have been an easy DCC fit. It featured the all-new XL decoder socket, which promises to be something that brings simplicity to fitting DCC decoders to these large-scale models. But there's a catch, and that catch was that the only decoders that I could find available then, and indeed now, are incredibly expensive sound decoders. You're talking £200 plus, and that is quite a big chunk of cash. Now I know a lot of people would be a bit scared of modifying their model to hardwire it. One slip of that soldering iron, you could very easily end up with a giant expensive paperweight, with Heljan maybe not even honouring the warranty on the grounds that maybe you caused the problem with doing the hard wiring. So it's something that I guess a lot of people would get a bit scared about, but it doesn't have to be that way. Today I'm going to be taking a much less expensive but really quite feature-rich decoder in the form of the Zen Buddha. This is able to put out quite a big punch, and that's going to be needed for this dual motor, dual flywheel unit of a locomotive. You can't use a regular decoder because it will just cremate them. And the Zen Buddha really is the perfect choice for this. We've got 6 full-powered auxiliary functions which give us pretty much all the lighting functions that this model comes with, and on top of that we've got a built-in stay alive, and that short protection will make sure that even if we somehow manage to overload this model, it's not going to be a problem because the decoder just protects itself. And the best thing about this DCC install is it's not modifying your model in the slightest. We're actually going to be using the XL headers and manufacturing our own pins for these that we can solder fly leads to that then screw to the screw terminals on the Zen Buddha. Now don't worry if that sounds a bit complicated, it's not, and I'm going to show you just how to do that in today's video, so come with me in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support comes from...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model double O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest loco.
DCC fitting for me is something that's now become second nature, but it wasn't always the case. I know a lot of you guys are DC modelers through and through and really want very little to do with DCC, and it has to be said, once upon a time I was in your camp as well. The unique selling point for me on DCC was actually the sound, but once I actually got into DCC I found the sound was not the killer app. There was a lot of other features with DCC which I found to be far more useful, and indeed actually a lot of the sound locomotives I don't run with the sound switched on because it can get quite noisy and tedious. With this O-gauge locomotive today, we're going to bring the joys of a DCC operation to this model without having the super huge price tag. But before that, I'd like to ask a huge favour. Do please remember to like this video, share it too, and subscribe if you've not already done so, and ring that notification bell to make sure that you get told about the content that you've chosen to follow. We've also got a link down below that takes you to Rails of Sheffield, where you can still pick up these O-gauge models at a really great price. And maybe this is the opportunity to buy in if you've been worried about the cost of the decoder for quite a long time and the absence of an XL non-sound decoder. I'm going to show you just how you can get your loco up and running without having to modify anything inside this locomotive. So come with me and let's get to it. It's been a little while since we reviewed the Heljan O-gauge Class 26, and at the time you might remember that one of the things that I pointed out on it is that it uses an ESU XL decoder socket inside for the purposes of plug-and-play DCC fitting. Now, at the time of recording, there was only sound decoders available in that format, and they are very expensive. They're designed for these large, heavy, dual motor, dual massive brass flywheel motored locomotives, and they can add quite a substantial chunk to the cost of getting these up and running on DCC. And I've seen a lot of comments online from people asking about whether there is a non-sound XL type decoder on the market. And quite frankly, there still isn't. So today's project is going to be looking at fitting the Zen Buddha decoder, which is available from DCC Concepts. Now, this is an all-in-one decoder that also gives you a large stay alive. We've got overload protection, and it really does give a very, very high power output, which is perfect for this kind of locomotive. The only drawback is that this uses screw terminals, which was the previous standard which these large models seem to use. And for some reason, Heljan moved over to this XL socket, and in one fell swoop meant that unless you're prepared to rip the guts out of your locomotive and hardwire in a decoder, then the only option on DCC was to buy a very expensive ESU XL decoder. Well, today I'm going to try and retrofit this decoder in without removing the socket. And, well, let's get on inside and let's take a look. To gain access inside the locomotive, there are 4 screws that we need to undo. Looking down in between the bogie frames, you'll see 2 screws which hold the motor in place, and then another one just up here behind the lead axle on each end of the bogie. These are the screws that we need to carefully remove. With a crosshead screwdriver, we just loosen that off. I'm going to use a magnet just to make sure that I can draw that screw out, and you can see there, quite a long one. Don't lose these. Obviously you're going to need that when you reassemble the model. I'm just using some neodymium magnets attached to the end of my jeweler's screwdriver, and by magnetizing it, it just helps me to be able to draw out these screws. And again, we're looking for the screws closest to the leading wheel set on each bogie, and one final screw just down here. Once we've got all those screws out, I'm just going to remove the foam, carefully turn this locomotive right side up. You will need to carefully unplug some of the multiple working cables just at either end of the model, and just lift it around the buffer just to be on the safe side, and just carefully lift this up. I'm just going to go to one side. You can see the wire that goes up there. There's not a lot of slack on this, and we're just going to very, very carefully pull that plug out. It's just a simple plug fit. Now this is the XL socket, and just work the blanking plate free, and you can see there's quite a lot of pins in here, But already it's obvious that the blanking plate only bothers with a certain number. Quite a few of these ones across the top just don't have corresponding pins on the blanking plate, and none of these down here connect in either. So I think it's quite safe to ignore most of these. Looking just down here, we do have some solder tabs which are marked up, although confusingly some of these aren't exactly 100% clear how that corresponds to the kind of pins that we're much more used to on conventional decoder sockets. I've looked around online and there's a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of just lack of information, but I've managed to find the pinouts for the XL decoder. For some reason, nobody seems willing to tell you what the pins on the locomotive are, and you effectively then have to reverse the description of the XL decoder to be able to work these out. So it is quite a careful thing to do. And what I'm thinking is going to be the best method is quite simply to use my own set of pins plugged down and in. And what could be better than to take them off the blanking plate? These are just soldered in. It's a solid connector, so it should be fairly easy to unsolder all of these and to drop the connectors out. So this is going to be a little bit of a tricky job. There's not a lot of solder on these, but there's a lot to unsolder all at once. So I'm going to use some of this solder wick, and as the name suggests, you melt the solder and this kind of wicks it up and takes it away from this board. I've never particularly used this stuff before, so it'll be a learning curve and hopefully we'll get some reasonable results. So I'm going to get the soldering iron warmed up. I'm going to get to work on removing the 2 rows of pins off the blanking plate. I've got a little bit of flux just to, I suppose, help the solder flow. I don't know whether it's necessary. I've got it to hand, so I am going to use just a little tiny bit on there. I'm not convinced I need it, but better to have and not need than need and not have. And one thing I do find can be a little bit helpful is putting a little bit of solder onto the soldering iron, not because we want to do some soldering, but because that helps the heat flow. And then just very carefully start the process of just wicking that solder up. And once the wick starts to fill up, cut that away with a pair of scissors and then continue on with the removing of the solder. Once you've got all of the solder loosened up, I'm just going to use some sprue cutters to trim out the pins. And we'll end up with that full row of the pins to go into the XL socket. The next thing now, we've got these pin headers off. I'm going to insert these back into the XL socket, line them up, push them in, and just make sure these go down all the way in and make contact. Again, same with these, just push them down and in. That's now given us a set of pin headers that I can solder to. It should be fairly easy to work out the pin headers and then start soldering some wires to the ones that we need. Taking a look at the Zen decoder, just going to take this out of the box. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And these are all color coded. And I'm just going to get the manual wiring diagram. So we've got the lights down this side, and on this side we've got our left and right rail, motor left and right, the ground and common for the lighting. So they're the only ones that I'm going to need to wire in. So the next step will be to get some wiring tails into all of these, ready to then solder to the appropriate pins on here. Tried to follow the colour coding, had to improvise in some places. I've used thicker wire for the track and also for going to the motor, and I think that's important because this thing is going to be drawing an awful lot of current. So next up is to solder these wires into the appropriate pin headings that we've now attached there, and then ultimately this will sit neatly out of the way in the middle here. For this, I'm going to fire up the soldering iron and I'm going to bring up a diagram that I found of the XL decoder pinouts. We're going to have to remember to flip it, and then I'm going to solder the appropriate wires to that. I've gone ahead and done all the soldering. It's quite a simple process, just following the guide for which pin is which. The only thing you've got to remember is that all of the diagrams online show the pinouts for the decoder, not the socket, so you have to kind of flip it in your head. So what appears on this side on the decoder is actually this side on the model and vice versa. So I've got all of those wires actually soldered in, any ends are trimmed, and because this decoder only has 6 full power auxiliary functions and the model is expecting more than that, I've just experimented with soldering a loop wire to the what would be the 7th auxiliary function. Now I'm hoping that that might be the fan. If it's not the fan, I can move that around because it does look like this model does have engine room lights as well. But we'll see when we get this on the track. With the locomotive on my rolling road, we can quickly see that lighting functions are working as expected. We've got the red marker lights there on the end, which are on F2. If we press the F0 button, we get the white lights. Now these actually do swap end with direction, but when it comes to the red lights, these can be found on F1 and F2 depending on which end. F3, I've got a cab light, and F4, the engine room lights come on, and I've also got the cab light on the other end. Now that's simply because I've doubled up on this particular auxiliary out. Now I do need as well to have a think about whether I want to activate the fan, and that's something that I might come back to at a later date. But for now, the only thing left to test is that the model actually runs. Well, I'm quite pleased with that. Definitely everything is working, and this is a reversible modification to the model. All you'd need is a blanking plate pressed back into the socket. Those pins that we soldered to will just pull out, and it's like that Zen Buddha decoder was never there. And this means that I can now use this on my garden railway. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video, found it informative, and don't forget we've got a link down below in the description box taking you to Rails of Sheffield, where they've still got in stock some of these Heljan behemoths of locomotives in O gauge. And they've got some of them at a really great price actually in the sale, so it's worth just having a browse if that's something of interest to you. And you can also find at that link the Zen Buddha decoders too, if you want to take on this DCC fitting challenge. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments section down below. Maybe you've got yourself one of these locomotives and you're taking on the DCC DCC challenge. Maybe you've found a better way of doing it, or maybe actually you've done a hardwire and didn't find it too difficult at all. Do please share your story in the comment section down below, and it's a great way of helping out your fellow modeler with your experience and advice. But don't forget to tickle that like button, share this video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, you know the drill by now, and also check out the full merch store that we've got underneath the video for all of the great hoodies, t-shirts, mugs and more. And until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling, bye for now. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support is provided by...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model 00 gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest logo.
I'd like to thank everybody over on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to our Patreon heroes. Without you guys over on Patreon, we really wouldn't be able to keep making the video content that you see on this channel. And don't forget that you can also head on over to patreon.com/JenniferKirk and check out the different tiers of rewards. Thank you so much. You are absolute legends.